Your current position right now, disaster risk reduction, and part of your duties is to work towards implementation of the UFO framework. What's the biggest challenge? How do you get countries that may be reticent to take action and to provide investment? What's the message? What's the strategy?
You know, it's really, I like to say that it's a real challenge because everyone thinks this makes ample sense. No one would ever tell you this is a bad idea. No, it's a very good idea. So the question is really, since it's really a good idea, where are the constraints? And I think it's the balancing act of the reward you get from being very proactive and decisive in disaster response, and making investments in a very sort of responsible manner that may not pay off until 10 years later. So I think the challenge for us, or the opportunity I would say, is to make it much more visible in very concrete terms. Why can you make a difference as an individual decision maker if you decide to, instead of increasing your disaster relief fund with 75%, you must still increase it obviously, but if you can take some of these resources and say, I will do a risk assessment of the status of all the schools in my country, and those schools that are below standards for whatever earthquake or other risks, we will fix them. And then we will actually make communities feel, understand, and hopefully take part in the process of making us safer. Mm-hmm. So that's a very concrete, but you know, in a more structured manner also. And I can see that this is beginning to work now because of the factors that externally influence. We are working a lot on the economics of risk reduction to try to demonstrate how it works if you make the investment in your budget, either standalone or by sector, in measures that we call risk reduction, but for you it may be a more energy efficient way of doing agriculture. It's a question of how you refurbish, retrofit physical infrastructure. It's doing risk assessment of your critical infrastructure. And you will be able to see over what time span and with what investments you may reduce this, so that indeed at some point you will have to make lesser investment in disaster response. Mm-hmm. And this work is beginning to have an impact. The technical work that is required to share experiences between different governments and how they are doing this has not progressed far enough yet. We hope to make a lot of progress here. And the issue is that the longer term, you have a changing environment, you have cities that grow very quickly, and you have many things that impact really our sense of that we're not quite sure what we're planning for yet. Mm-hmm. And therefore I think this need to deal with very basic things and try to put these options and the menus for option in the hands of people who can take responsibility for it is very important. So we talk with governments, with planning ministries, with economic finance ministries, ministers of education of course, but they are not in control of their buildings normally, so you have to actually spread this. That's the essence of the necessary strong political leadership. I think there is a lot of political leadership that gets played out very positively when you start looking at reality from this perspective. We're working with communities to encourage them to take more responsibility for their own safety and security, to understand their near environment. Look, are the drains in your village clogged? That's why it floods so much. Is the school in the right place? If not, maybe you can actually pull together and move it so it doesn't get destroyed next time you have big floods. Start at that level as well. Mm. People's engagement and motivation will of course influence how local governments also feel empowered then to take action. Because a lot of these things, I think it's very important to see us as citizens also being responsible. We have to be ready to support sometimes extremely difficult decisions that governments have to take on our behalf. It's the choices between my immediate reward tomorrow and my safer community in 10 years, or my grandchildren's safer community. And today, overall, we are a bit too much focused on immediate rewards, I think.
Who are your heroes and why?
Oh, my heroes. I had some heroes that I met a few weeks ago, in fact, in the state of Maharashtra in India. A colleague of mine, we went there to revisit the communities that were hit by an earthquake 15 years ago. So that was the general framework. But there I met groups of women who are organized in self-help groups, and to see their trajectory from dealing with very basic things to building trust, to taking bank loans to improve the lives of their families, and to go from there to realize that what they really need to do is to go for political action, so to standing for elections in their village councils. I found a few heroes there, I must say, because that's how the earth is moving forward, really, through normal people, as you say. At the other end of the spectrum, some of my heroes are people who in the international domain have shown incredible foresight in understanding how only international development can save this world from some of its more negative aspects. One of the early Secretary Generals of the UN who came out as a domestic civil servant to have a great vision for how the cooperation needs to develop. Mr. Dag Hammarskjöld, who happened to be Swede, but that's not why he's a great man. So in my so these are the types of people. Also many activists that never give up. I've always looked at the backwards when my colleagues are a bit in despair. How on earth can we move disaster risk reduction agenda forward? I said, look at the environmental movement. You would never have believed that we would be where we are today when they started as tree huggers. No, now today countries have legislation. Everyone knows that this is a survival issue. The landmines campaign. Who would ever have believed that we even today would have legislation or treaty on cluster weapons? So, it's a little bit this dilemma between the short and slightly longer term issues that I think it's a bit of a challenge, but it's also a motivation when you get the opportunity to see what can be achieved through the cooperation between countries, people, civil society. We have the capacity to address many of the challenges today, are really serious ones.